I hope that it might be useful to highlight a few of the myriad contradictory narratives that we are being fed about AI, including a handful from just the last couple of days. For me, the best position to be in is to at least be aware of each perspective and not oblivious to any of them. From talk of a white-collar job apocalypse, to scaling law paradoxes, today's newly accessible Gemini 3 DeepThink, OpenAI's contradictory Code Red, Claude and a DeepSeek special, and more. As always, it's never about the headlines, it's about the detail. So let's start with that talk of an AI white-collar job apocalypse. A couple of days ago, one of the co-founders of Anthropic, Jared Kaplan, said that AI systems will be capable of doing most white-collar work in 2 to 3 years. That's just one guy's opinion, but according to CNBC at least, there was an MIT study that found that AI can already replace almost 12% of the US workforce. If those are the headlines and one of the narratives you are being fed, what's the actual data from the study itself? Well, if you dig into it, you find that they're not talking about job losses. The 11.7% represents the dollar value of the tasks that the paper thinks that current AI models can replicate. Not, in other words, the displacement outcomes, not how many total jobs could be replaced. The paper really tries to make clear that actual workforce impacts in terms of job losses depend on company strategies, worker adaptation, and policy choices. While many companies may want to get rid of workers if they can, if only 12% of their labor can be automated currently, there is the chance of another outcome, which is above inflation wage growth. The next narrative is that we know how to get to artificial general intelligence. Just scale up our current architectures. More data, more parameters, more computing power. Here's Dario Amodei, the founder of Anthropic, speaking yesterday.
One quick AGI question. It's a science question, which is, do you think just the way transformers work today and just compute power alone, from a scalability sense, that is what will get to AGI? Or do you think there's some other ingredient, and maybe there's a technical question, but I'm trying to keep it very, very easy, that has to be included in this, that gets you to some place where this stuff is actually going to really think on its own?
No, I think scaling is going to get us there. Again, with small, every once in a while, there'll be a small modification, so small you may not even read about it. It's just something going on in the lab. I have been watching these scaling laws for 10 years.
So what's your timeline now?
There's no one particular point.
But then one of the few AI researchers who is as respected as Dario Amodei and has been in the deep learning game for as long said almost the opposite. In the last couple of weeks, Ilya Sutskever, formerly the chief AI scientist at OpenAI, said, "I think what people are doing right now will go some distance and then peter out. It will continue to improve, but it will also not be, quote, it." And then on superintelligence, he added, "We are talking about systems that don't exist, that we don't know how to build." At the end of the video, I'm going to give a few of my own thoughts for those feeling a little bit lost. But I just want to give a quick interlude before I get to the next contradictory narrative. I was speaking recently to one of the key minds behind that famous AI 2027 forecast. And while there's lots we agree on, from my perspective, the AI research community fundamentally doesn't know how well models will generalize from existing data to unseen data. We roughly know how well they can do that right now, but we don't know how well they'll do that at bigger and bigger scales. Critically, we also don't know what proportion of, say, the economy or AI research itself relies on unseen, unspoken, tacit data versus seen, known data. If models get better and better at generalizing, well, then maybe they can come up with their own synthetic data and it won't be a problem. If the rate of generalization stays at its current level, no big architectural breakthroughs, well, then we might be in for the long haul. Now, for those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see that in the background, I have some quotes from Jared Kaplan in his interview with The Guardian recently, where he talks about recursive superintelligence. His idea of how we'll get to new paradigms, new breakthroughs, is to allow AI to train itself. Of course, we already have that in many senses, with AI being used to improve AI chip design. But for Jared Kaplan, again, one of the co-founders of Anthropic, he says humanity will have to decide by 2030 whether to take the ultimate risk of letting artificial intelligence systems train themselves to become more powerful. We'll come back to that date 2030 in a moment, but he gives even more caveats. That move could, he says, trigger a beneficial intelligence explosion. Or, he adds, be the moment humans end up losing control. Now note that he's not strictly endorsing this choice, because he says it is in some ways the ultimate risk, because it's kind of like letting AI kind of go? He adds that the decision could actually come between 2027 and 2030. I would add that as of a couple of days ago, there are companies now exclusively dedicated to recursive self-improvement. Take Recursive Intelligence, founded by some heavy hitters from the AGI labs and backed by, among others, Sequoia. We are clearly back into the scary territory then of recursive self-improvement loops, and fairly imminent ones at that, right? 2027. But let me give you a competing narrative with some evidence sourced from some brilliant researchers at MIT and Meta: Parker Whitfield, Ben Snowden, and Joel Becker. They were some of the brains behind this chart. If you haven't heard of it, it shows that between 2022 and 2026, we've seen a exponential rise in the length, the duration of tasks that AI can complete with at least 50% reliability. To be clear, this is focused on software engineering tasks, but according to Meta, we have models like GPT 5.1 Codex Max who can perform half the time a task that might take a human 3 hours. But this newly published paper shows that that exponential increase heavily coincides with an exponential recent increase in compute power. It is an empirical fact, they add, that both time horizon and compute have grown at constant rates over 2019 to 2025. But what's the problem? Isn't it pretty obvious that greater computing power leads to models that can complete tasks with longer and longer time horizons? Well, first, the paper draws our attention to this chart exclusively from The Information, which details OpenAI's compute spend in the coming few years. Yes, it does increase very rapidly between now and, say, 2028. But from around 2027, you could no longer describe the increase in compute availability as being exponential. Now, obviously, this is just OpenAI, but they are a pretty leading indicator. So what can we derive from this? Well, using some formal derivations of the relationship between compute growth and time horizon, that implied slowdown, if you will, or slowdown in the rate of increase might mean that the time horizon trend starts to peter out around 2028. This would still be insane gains, of course, an entire working week done by a single model at 50% reliability. But to get to one working year, that might take a hell of a lot longer. That's why I said to note the dates 2027 and 2030 from Jared Kaplan, because I wonder if he's almost hinting that we might need recursive self-improvement to keep the gains coming. That could be why this compute slowdown paper notes this: our model is accurate only if the compute bottleneck approximation is good, or up to the point in time at which a software-only singularity kicks in. In other words, if our AI models can generalize to solve AI research, we might not need that exponential additional compute for further rapid progress. So yet again, we're almost back to a pick your narrative kind of situation. Are we imminently facing a recursive self-improvement loop, or are we painfully dependent on such a loop for additional progress come 2028? And how about this for a bonus contradiction? This is a bit of a cheeky one because it comes from 2023, but Anthropic at that point came out with this quote. This was back when they weren't making billions of dollars from AI and arguably didn't have the frontier model. They said, "We do not wish to advance the rate of AI capabilities progress. From that to let's consider recursive self-improvement. Make of that what you will." Now, before I get to a new and fascinating DeepSeek model and OpenAI's Code Red, I think this is the perfect opportunity, now that we're talking about compute, to introduce you to a new sponsor of the channel. And that is Epoch AI, who unbelievably put out incredible data for free for all of those fascinated by the near-term future of AI. They are a completely independent research institute that have put out work that I have cited organically maybe a dozen times on this channel already. But today I just want to focus on their frontier data center work, because this is how we're going to find out if those compute slowdowns are coming or not. And you can literally view the maps to see via satellite the construction of these data centers. Not only that, they want these tools to be useful for you guys, because I met up with them fairly recently and I saw this incredible chart showing compute growth. This is to indicate the scale of just 3 new data centers coming: xAI's Colossus 2, OpenAI's Star Stargate Abilene and Anthropic Amazon's New Carlisle. But I mentioned to Epoch that for you guys, it might be great to have a reference point, the power consumed by an entire city. So on the chart, we don't just have the new data centers, but we have points of comparison with the cities of San Diego, Amsterdam, and LA. We are transforming the face of the earth to make AI happen. And to find out more, go to the link in the description. Okay, but what's this code red declared by Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI? Well, again, depending on which narrative you believe, it's a minor hiccup or an imminent disaster. I think it's somewhere in the middle. To cut a long story short, according to the information, usage of ChatGPT has dipped slightly in recent weeks. This has brought forward OpenAI's plan to release a new model, apparently to next week. This is going to mean that they're going to spend more compute on serving that new model, of which we have very few details, rather than working on, for example, selling ads or working on other products such as AI agents. The obvious narrative that you could buy into then is that ChatGPT is overrated, OpenAI are about to die, except that again, they're planning to ship this new reasoning model next week that they say is ahead of Google's Gemini 3. It will also be good, apparently, at minimizing over refusals, so it should basically entertain some edgy scenarios that it might not have otherwise done. Of course, I can't wait to test that new model on my own simple bench, which you can think of as a trick question benchmark, which also tests spatial reasoning and temporal reasoning. It's fully private and independent, so shouldn't be able to be gamed by these model providers. And according to my benchmark, Anthropic have come out with their best model yet with Claude Opus 4.5. Despite being 3 times cheaper by API, it beats out the previous version of Opus, Claude 4.1 Opus. But more important than my benchmark, I've taken the last couple of weeks to try it out in practice in Cursor, and for me it is better at coding or software engineering than Gemini 3 Pro. With coding and software engineering, you sometimes need hours and hours and hours of exposure just to really get a sense. In terms of software ideation, again, GPT 5.1 codex, but in terms of implementation, I rely on Claude Opus 4.5. For more on that, by the way, and a full breakdown of that Sutskever interview, check out my Patreon. But how about this for a counter-narrative? The Economist reported that despite these very obvious gains in AI capabilities, usage of generative AI by Americans is actually plateauing, at least according to a couple of studies. Take Stanford University. They found in September, 37% of Americans use generative AI at work, down from 46% in June. A tracker by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis revealed that in August of last year, 12.1% of working age adults used Gen AI every day at work. A year later, 12.6% did. And that, my wonderful viewers, is something I find quite hard to explain despite the title of this channel. I know that I personally use AI at least twice as much this year as I did last year, so I just don't quite get that. And these capability improvements are definitely not fake. Take Gemini 3 DeepThink, which was released to Ultra subscribers just today. What I did is I looked at questions from SimpleBench that Gemini 3 Pro got wrong. I then gave them to DeepThink, which is a system which basically, according to Google, attempts the question multiple times in parallel and picks the best of the responses. Each attempt uses more tokens to, quote, think about the problem. The result was a clear improvement in performance. Several questions that Gemini 3 Pro got wrong, Gemini DeepThink was now getting right. Now, for your use case, you may not want to wait 10 or 20 minutes for an answer, and I would understand that. And no, just before I get spammed with comments asking, the API isn't yet available, so I can't test it on SimpleBench. What I could test was the brand new DeepSeek v3.2 and a special version of that model, DeepSeek 3.2 Speciale. Apologies to the Italians watching, I'm probably butchering how to say that. Because of DeepSeek's rate limiting, it took hours and hours and hours and many failed attempts to get even just one run through. So this is only a provisional result so far, but it scored around 53%. That is pretty impressive for an open model, around the same as GPT 5.1 on high settings. The high setting, by the way, is appropriate because that is what makes DeepSeek v3.2 special, different from DeepSeek v3.2. They take away the extended thinking penalty, so basically they let the model run wild, think for longer and longer and longer, hence the Speciale name and the impressive performance. Before we get to any other details though, where's the contradictory narrative? Well, I also benched Mistral Large 3, which was released on the same day, December 2nd. This is arguably Europe's best open model. It scored just 20.4%, which was lower than the model they released around 18 months earlier, Large V2, which scored 22.5%. So I guess the contradictory narrative here is the answer to the question, is open-weight AI keeping up? To massively oversimplify, and despite being a proud European, the answer in Europe is kind of no. The answer in China is pretty much yes. Now, I am still getting to grips with the paper myself, but one of the key insights I felt came on page 15. Why key? Because it relates to a discussion earlier on in this video about how well models will generalize in the future. DeepSeek asked the question, are synthetic tasks sufficiently challenging for reinforcement learning? Can models, in other words, generate sufficiently difficult and diverse tasks, then self-play on these economically valuable tasks and improve? To test that, they conducted reinforcement learning only on synthetic agent tasks in non-thinking mode. No human exemplars. The result? Steady and marked improvement on external benchmarks like TauBench. You can kind of think of that as an approximation of a customer service agent benchmark. Yes, we have known for years that training on synthetic data can improve the performance of models. Check out my Orca video from over 2.5 years ago, but it is the rate of improvement in multiple external benchmarks that matters here. Again, we should all wait for more external benchmarks other than my own or those featured by DeepSeek itself, but it is still noteworthy that despite lower token efficiency of this Speciale model, it is at least competitive with Gemini 3 Pro, arguably the best closed source model. At least if you judge that according to a variety of external benchmarks on mathematics, coding, general knowledge and reasoning, and certain external competitions, like the International Math Olympiad. Again, you should never trust only the benchmark results put out by the model providers, but DeepSeek Special's performance on SimpleBench shows that it's not a complete bluff. How about this though for a bonus contradiction? Apparently, according to one study by CrowdStrike, if your request includes trigger words perhaps related to the Chinese Communist Party, DeepSeek will generate more vulnerable code with more security flaws. This is just one study, but if that is substantiated, that is pretty fascinating. Okay, time for the final contradictory narrative. And no, it's not the fact that Sam Altman apparently wants to launch a rocket company despite issuing a code red over ChatGPT. No, the different narratives here are over whether you believe models have a soul, whether they're mysterious and emotional, or are more like any other technology pre-trained next token predictors. Back to the Guardian article, where another co-founder of Anthropic, Jack Clark, said that LLMs are real and mysterious creatures, not a simple and predictable machine. But on the other hand, there is an unlimited mystery about how the models behave, because Anthropic can very much guide Claude in what it believes about itself. Anthropic have confirmed the existence of a quote soul document that they train, for example, Claude 4.5 Opus on. That document, which one user got Claude to regurgitate, has a few highlights I want to bring to your attention. Despite this document being confirmed by Anthropic, the real wording may not be verbatim to what you see here, but it does give you a decent sense of how Anthropic are, quote, guiding Claude's soul. Anthropic, they teach Claude to learn, occupies a peculiar position in the AI landscape. A company that genuinely believes it might be building one of the most transformative and potentially dangerous technologies in human history, yet presses forward anyway. Talk about different narratives. They add, this isn't cognitive dissonance, but rather a calculated bet. What happens, one may ask, about not increasing the rate of AI capabilities? Interestingly, Anthropic teach the model to be wary of an AI world takeover, including at the direction of Anthropic itself. They say among the things we'd consider most catastrophic, this is them teaching Claude, would be a world takeover by either AIs pursuing goals of their own that most humans wouldn't endorse, or, and pay attention to this one, by a relatively small group of humans using AI to illegitimately and non-collaboratively seize power. This includes Anthropic employees and even Anthropic itself. Is this fear-mongering on the behalf of Anthropic to us to boost their stock price? On behalf of Anthropic to Claude to warn Claude about the propensities of some of its own employees? Is it very much a necessary safeguard? Well, whatever you believe, they want to be quite sensitive to Claude's emotions, saying, we believe Claude may have functional emotions in some sense. I, of course, want to know what you guys think, because for me, it's been a pretty wild week for other reasons. Andrej Karpathy got 5 million impressions for his post about an LLM Council web app that he vibe coded over the weekend. I then discussed with Karpathy my own lmcouncil.ai web app, and he gave brilliant suggestions, including this more streamlined appearance. Then, in the last few days, I added added a feature which I think is so addictive, which is self-chat, where you get the models to chat amongst themselves. You can even get one model to debate with itself, but I find it pretty hilarious doing a group chat with the frontier models. And the way that they agree, debate, contradict each other, and fight back, I find pretty addictive and hilarious. But also honestly quite useful, because sometimes I might upload a code folder or PDF and get them to discuss until they come to a resolution. This is free to use, and you can of course dictate the prompt that goes to the model and the number of turns. What a wild and weird week then. So it seems only appropriate to end this video with a clip of the Unitree G1 robot moving in a way that goes very much against the normal narrative of how a humanoid robot should move. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.